Naomi, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's super exciting to be here.
Pleasure.
I'm over in the States and you're in the UK, and we're in our Labour series, and so we're talking about Labour. You've got 5 kids.
I have grown and cracked out 5 babies. I feel like I've got my money's worth out my body.
Naomi, your body it's beautiful and it's done some incredible things.
Yeah.
I know one of your birth stories pretty well, but I don't think I know all of them very well. Give us, to start off with, give us the age of your kids and give us like a rough overview of each birth.
Okay, so my eldest is nearly 14, which is crazy. So she's 14 in just literally a couple of weeks' time. My second has just turned 12. Third is 9. She's turned this year. Then my fourth is 7. And then my fifth and final is 4. So
it's a lot to remember. Gosh.
It's a lot to remember. So 9.5 years difference, 5 kids. So yeah.
Amazing. And where were you based and what do you do?
We're based in Hereford currently, and I've got a couple of different things, irons in the fire as it were. I guess my main job is safeguarding. So I work as a safeguarding consultant, which is really great. My background is social work, but we've also worked for church and for NGO opportunities and stuff. And so I've actually worked with children for a very long time, a couple of decades, and then had our own on the journey. And then we've lived in East Africa, we've lived in South Africa as well, and added children along the journey. So we've actually very small children, being pregnant overseas, but I've actually had all of our babies in the UK. Wow. So a very quick overview of my births, as it were. So my first I was actually induced because of low platelets and stuff, and I'd obviously never had a baby before. Interestingly, it was actually in a very good hospital in Oxfordshire, and the week before they'd actually had a mum with exactly the same symptoms, but they had gone to crisis point, so they actually induced it early because they didn't want to risk me and the baby, which actually everything was absolutely fine, and it was incredible. But that's quite intense. Being induced is like starting a car. It's like bang, you're in. Oh, there we go. Which actually
true.
It is true.
Quickly, which induction did you have? Did you have the pessary or the drip?
I had the drip, the pessary.
I
had it, and also the midwife was the staff I've had over the years. Yeah, there's been ones I'm like, maybe bedside manner, whatever. Actually, the care we've had has been incredible, and I'm just so grateful. But the midwife missed the vein the first time, and then they had a policy that they couldn't do it twice. So they got a student doctor in who literally grabbed my hand and shoved it in, and it was in. But it felt like the most painful part. It wasn't the most painful part, but it felt needless. As in, like, that bit wasn't supposed to hurt quite that much. So anyway, me just being very dramatic because I didn't realize what was coming. So that jump started. So just very intense, very quickly, which actually was good, but set me up for a little bit of, I wouldn't say failure. For the second one, I didn't know I was in labour because it grew gradually. So I actually, looking back on it, I was probably already in labour, but Abigail, my second, was born very quickly. So by the time I got into hospital, I went in because I wasn't sure, wasn't comfortable, but went in, and within 23 minutes I was holding her. So that was a bit of a shock, which then made me really nervous for number 3. And so I went in with a couple of false alarms. But then actually she was born in the wrong ward because the midwives opened my file and said, well, you obviously delivered quickly, but we don't know how long you're labouring because you didn't labour in the hospital, so we've got no records. So we'll just watch you for a little bit. I start quickly, as in I will obviously contract and labour for a while. And, you pace it off and everything. But then as soon as I start, I'm going for it. So thankfully that last stage is pretty quick, very intense, but pretty quick. So I tried gas and air twice, didn't get on with it at all, but that was literally that's the only pain relief I ever had time for, which part of me is like, I would just really love to have something, but they're like, you're too far gone, you're done, let's go. So then, interestingly, my fourth was a boy. So I've got 4 girls and 1 boy. My fourth was a boy, and I got to the part of labour with him, and I was like, okay, a couple more pushes and we're done. Those couple of pushes came and we weren't done because boys' heads are different. It was all his head. I'm entirely convinced that it was his head. And so it took a little while longer. But again, healthy baby. At the end of it was all good. Then by the time I had my 5th, my body was definitely older than when I'd had my first. And I had a point in labour where I was obviously holding on, and the midwife was excellent. In fact, I think I'd had her, my husband remembered which one I'd had her with, but I just, when a midwife's like, hello, we met before, and like, I can't remember that. I just, it's a bit of a blur. So she was like, you're holding on. She knew, she could see that I was holding. I was like, yeah, I think, I don't want to kind of go through the pain, and I don't want my body to fall apart, actually was what it was. Because I had this really weird feeling that, how Barbie's legs pop off? A Barbie doll, their legs just kind of, I was convinced that one of my legs was going to pop off, because I was, as you push, I was like, there's only so much space, there's only so many times you can do this. And I'd had a reoccurring kind of pain in my hips. I'd had a few problems, with that, but I was just really convinced my leg was I was just gonna lose a leg in labor. And so she's just like, sweetheart, we'll sort you out afterwards. And then that was it. Well, okay, great, let's crack on. Yeah, so that's a very quick overview of my 5. Incredible. And honestly, my husband was literally holding me, like, especially with the last one. I stood to have her, and he literally just held me up, and he was constantly saying to the boys, this is how she labours, this is what she does, we're 2 pushes away, and like, yeah, sure. They're like, no, really, you want to put a mat there? And we're lit to those kind of details. He was just incredible. My body reacts to shock, and I think I did go into shock with each of them. I don't share this because I didn't know this, and I didn't, your body reacts differently, and not everyone gets this, but I think I'd assumed the first time round it was just going to be, I was going to hold my baby, and then it was all just going to be like lovely. And it's actually quite messy, but it is painful. I wrote a birth plan each time. The babies don't read the birth plans, so it just didn't quite happen like that. And I did hold my baby, but then actually my body went into shock, and the way my body reacts is I throw up. And so I'd be holding this beautiful baby and then want to be sick. And I felt really guilty about it, because I'm like, I'm holding this precious baby and my body's throwing up. I'm like, is there something wrong with me? And it was when I realized it was shock, and that was my body's reaction to it, especially when they came quickly. That actually took a while to, like, my body literally reacted like that. The other thing I did was, the babies they're so tiny when they're born, aren't they? They have these tiny little ears and tiny little fingers. And I was just terrified I'd knock something off. So Chris, who is a lot bigger than me, I'd be like, you take the baby now, you get them dressed, you put the nappy on. I can't, I might snap a finger off, and I've grown them. And so those are my 2 kind of, each time I threw up, and then the baby had to go to Chris to like get dressed, because I was like, I don't want to break them. So there we go, there's my
No, that is fantastic. I love that it was quick for you, and I think that for me was the reason I wanted to talk to you, because some people, you do read about the labor and the time that it takes, and I've had friends that have labored for like 14-15 hours, and they've like gone in and they're like, you're 2 centimeters, go home, and they've come back, and then they've gone in, they've come back. Whereas it was for me, it was Abigail's birth for 23 minutes, 26 minutes, that I was like, that's unusual, but it does happen. And if someone's preparing for something, you prepare off the books, and that means you're going to labor for ages. It's going to be 1 hour of labor per centimeter dilation. It's you have all those stories because they go on, or they teach you what the average is. And then every now and then there's a parent that isn't the average, and you're not the average in so many ways. But it was the speed of Abigail, and I think the shock as well. I think one of mine, my body went into shock and I passed out. They had to press the buzzer, and Dave said he'd never seen so many midwives and doctors enter a room so quickly. It was like within minutes, because I had a fit. I went into shock and tried to stand up, and then had a fit, and so it was absolutely fine. But it was one of those things of like, oh, people don't necessarily talk about the aftermath. They don't talk about the hour after the baby, or the kind of, because it is beautiful. They make sure the baby's safe and you're safe, and then they give you an hour in your room. This is in British hospitals with the NHS. They give you an hour in your room, and they leave you to it, so you can bond with your baby and bond with your partner. And so there's something really beautiful about it, but no one talks about the shock, or the sewing up, or the baby's whisked away from you because there's a complication. Those kinds of things don't happen. But before we go to the hour after, because I love that hour, I think it's really magical, what were, other than your leg popping off or losing a child's limb, that for me is fascinating, that went through your head?
Yeah, I think crazy things do go through your head, actually. And I think because obviously with the leg popping off, that was my fifth. And so I was just aware of the weakness of my body, if that makes sense. I think I'm in awe of the strength of my body, the fact that I had grown. But I think by the time that I had my last, I just was aware of the weakness as well. I think because I knew what it was going to take to birth this child, and my leg didn't pop off, just spoiler. I have both my legs attached by the grace of God. I think the fear also stemmed because I actually am slightly double jointed. So in the past, I've dislocated a knee and stuff just by putting pressure on it slightly wrong. It just pops out. So actually that probably gives a little bit of context. Like actually that can happen to joints. And so that was just, and it was just one of those irrational things that kind of pop into your head. And it made me feel quite silly, especially having had a baby several times. Like actually I should know. And I think that's what was interesting through all of them is actually looking back, I did know my body. I did know that I wasn't ready to have Eve, and she was early, my first, and I was induced with her. And I mean, you ask questions, when you look back, you're like, oh, should I have pushed to have this kind of birth, or should I have done things different? Hindsight is great. You have to go with what was in front of you then. And there's elements of, I actually feel guilty that I had a really fast birth, because I'm aware of so many friends that didn't. Actually, I've also, my family, there is actually a lot of infertility. So we have a story of adoption within our family as well. One of my sisters she's not much older than me, but she's had a full hysterectomy as well. And so actually there's a lot of that in my family. So I think there was an element of guilt around my body's ability to have babies and then have them quickly. I almost felt like I didn't want to tell my birth story, especially with the quick one, because there's an element of like, oh, it's easy for you. You pop them out and stuff. Actually, the intensity was still the same. And I think that's where that then fear of something's got to give, it's probably going to be my leg, that kind of, it stems from. It's the same amount of intensity. It just doesn't necessarily. So with my quick one, it was fast and I went into shock. But because I hadn't taken so long, or because, I'd obviously been contracting and stuff, but I'd thought they were just Braxton Hicks because I'd had them before. But you just walk them off. And I was just walking them off I was actually baking a cake that morning. I remember it so clearly. And it was a lemon drizzle, because I was trying to work out whether I should freeze it or whether I should, because I can't freeze it once it's iced. So I was like, do I ice this? Because am I going to have the baby the next day or two? Or do I need to freeze the cake? And I just remember why is this the thing that's bothering me? But I think it was because I knew that I was very, very close. And so then what happened was, because it hadn't taken a long time, I didn't think I was tired. So I kept going. So we actually was also, so another thing with the NHS is they are exceptional, but if you don't have any complications and you have babies quickly, they send you home pretty quickly as well. So friends had come and picked up my eldest and they'd taken her out for the day. And so just in the morning, because my husband was actually out, and I called him, I was like, can you just come back? He's out for breakfast with some friends. And so then they came and took the eldest one off for the day. So she popped out for the morning with her friend, which she thought was a great adventure. By the time she was home, just after lunch, I had gone to hospital, had a baby, and was back home, because they literally, as I didn't make it to the ward, I only ever stayed in the hospital with my first, and that was because she was induced and stuff like that. So within hours, I was sent home. But that actually made me then think, oh, who wants cake? Because I made some. So because I wasn't necessarily as mentally, I wasn't as tired, because I hadn't labored as long in my head. However, my body had done the same amount of work. She was born on the Saturday. Wednesday, I crashed completely because I pushed myself and I hadn't acknowledged what my body had gone through. Yeah, so I think I had then pushed myself too hard. I mean, it's a great story to tell, but you walk into hospital at 10:10 and at 10:33 you're holding your baby. It was, but I remember, so we went in, just because I think some people love details about birth stories, and that's what this is about. So we went into the hospital, and I went into the wrong, so there's different wards, you have to go for the triage to get checked how many centimeters dilated, but it was a different hospital to the one that my first was born in. So we actually went straight to labour ward, thank goodness. But then, so they were just showing us to a room because it was a quiet morning, and then they'd had a problem with the computer, so they couldn't log us in. So I was in the room on my own with my husband, and I just said to him, oh, when is she coming in? And he's like, you don't, let's not get rude, we've got a while yet, so let's just watch our tone. So, I mean, in retrospect, again, it was like hilarious because I was just holding onto these arms of this chair thinking, oh, she just needs to come and check me really quickly. Otherwise I might have to, he just thinks, I'm like, I'm going to need to lift the chair up or whatever. I'm like, it's a big armchair. So I just like, there was this kind of surge of something's got to give. Anyway, he went to check with the midwife. I was like, we're just having a problem with the computer. We can't log you in. And I called him because I was like, come here, because I'd had a really strong contraction. The next thing I know, the midwives are pushing past him, putting on their green gloves. They're like, we know that shout. And they literally burst in the room. And my water's broken. There she was. Like, it was that hectic. And so, but then the great thing was so now they have big inflatable birth pools in most of the labour wards that they have here in the UK. But at the time, they only had like one that had like a built-in big bath for like having babies in. But then they're like, well, this nurse was like, you didn't get to get in there because you're so quick. Do you fancy a bath now? I was like, yes, I do. Like, do you want the baby with you? I was like, no, I don't. Like, I had held her, I had fed her, like, we'd done all of that. But then for the first time in 9 months, I sat in the bath and my body, it was just me. It was just me. And I was like, I mean, it didn't last long because obviously then, but it was that moment of, okay, great. And that was a very special bath.
No, that's amazing. Gosh, there's so much in there. I'd love to know, how did you deal with the fear? Because I think, the fear that your leg would pop off or that you'd hurt the baby. I remember having constantly having this fear walking down the stairs of, I'm going to fall with this baby in my arms. Like, all the time, I'm going to fall with this baby in my arms, or the fear of I'm not strapped them in well enough. Or I think it goes to say that in parenting, fear is a work of the enemy that comes to get us and trap us and hold us. It's also sometimes like a very real
warning.
Do you know what like your body's a system that keeps you in check. What are some of the things that you did personally to tackle some of those fears? I guess in hindsight can sound quite funny, of the you thought your leg would pop off, but
right?
in a very real way, as parents, fear is really common. There's fear around labour. There's also just general fear around having a baby or a newborn baby, or will I hurt them, or will I get this wrong, or am I going to pull their cord off too soon? All those funny little things that go through our head. What are some of the things that you did to tackle some of those fears?
What I say to mums, especially first-time mums, when they're getting ready to have their first baby, I was like, actually, your body knows what it's doing. It's your mind that you've got to focus on. Because I knew as soon as I let my mind go, my labours took longer. And I think so one of the reasons why I was so quick with my second was I didn't realise I was in labour. So my body cracked on with it. And your body knows what it's doing. That's exactly, and that is, I'm in awe. I am in absolute awe of what our bodies are able to do. And the fact they do know what they're doing. I know when you say that, it's instinctive. It's very, very instinctive. But it's also a battle of the mind. And I think I said a minute ago about my husband, he was exceptional because he knows how I think and he knew where I was going. And I don't know, I felt in each one, there was a moment where you go very into yourself. And it's like I felt it was very dark, not in a scary, but it's deep. You go deep inside. I had my eyes closed. I would be holding something. I stood for all of mine or leant on something for all of mine. My third one was actually interesting because I was in the wrong room because I laboured quite quickly. And so that we'll get to in a minute. But I remember leaning on the bed with her and I managed to open my eyes, and my husband was stood the other side of the bed holding me. And he just fixed his eyes on mine and he said, you can and you will. And he's like, you're strong enough. And he spoke to those fears for me. And so I think that was, for me, that's helped me very, very much because of our relationship. And I know that's not everybody's experience. And I know that's not what everybody has. But I would say whether that's husband, partner, or friend, actually, sometimes people want their mum with them or something like that. That person who knows you really well, that can call out that, you've got it, let's crack on and do it. And like that, calling out that strength. Not what I didn't need was someone to stroke my back. We tried that with we tried that with my first one. The midwife with my first, like, try some aromatherapy oils. Okay, physical touch is not, ironically, having had 5 kids, I mean, it's 2 sides to that one. Obviously it is part of my love language, however, it's not my, like, oh, just stroke me. I just like, don't touch my feet, don't touch me. Like, the thought of having a pedicure is just, no, I'll probably kick someone. So I'm just not that wired. So like, I didn't need, some people do, some people, if that's what relaxes you, if that's what makes you feel connected, that's great. For me, it was him looking me in the eye and connecting and like, you've got this, and speaking strength to me. And it was that battle of the mind. As soon as I let my thoughts go, it hurt more. As soon as I let my thoughts go, I couldn't do it. As soon as I was like, no, come on. So then with the last one, where it's like, we'll fix you up, don't worry, let's focus on the baby. That was it. Okay, focus, get my mind focused, get my mind back. And I actually think that is a good lesson for parenting as well, because it's like, fix your eyes on what the prize is right now. It's like, okay, healthy baby. That's so, when my third was born and it was in the wrong room, I was actually wedged between a bed and the wall, and they had to hit the emergency for her as well, because she had the cord around her neck twice. And so obviously if they were then to like unloop it, it would strangle her. So they told me to stop at one point, and I remember thinking, how, I've never had to stop before. Like, as soon as you crack in it, but I remember again that moment of, it's the baby, like, so I just, and it just, you just find a strength from within. And she was okay, but the trolley came, the emergency trolley came, the resuscitating kit came, and the nurses, and bless her, there was also somebody who wasn't very far established in labour, and because that ward is an open ward and there's 4 beds and a little curtain between you, so she heard the whole thing, and it was her first. I'm like, oh sweetheart, I'm so sorry, but you got it, you can do it. So, you know, even if something goes wrong, it's, you know, you're good, you're in good hands. So bless her. If ever she listens to this message, I'm sorry, I wasn't too loud. I'm not a big screamer, but, you know, oops, you know, nobody wants to hear somebody else go into labour when you're waiting. So anyway, but it's that focus of fixing what is true and what is right. And I think that's something I've talked about before, about what I try and teach my kids, because now actually I've got teenagers in high school, and that is a whole different level of fear and concerns. And honestly, parenting can be a huge guilt trip and a complete fear kind of trip as well. Can I protect them? And I think that was the whole breaking a finger off or something. It's like, can I protect this child? Can I keep them safe? And honestly, my background as a social worker made me question, like, what worlds am I bringing these children into? Can I protect them? Can I keep them safe? And I think it is that focus of, okay, well, I'm going to parent them in a way that they, to hopefully make good choices, and hopefully I make the right choices. And so I think that capturing your thoughts right from the start actually is a lesson you have to then continue throughout, when they're toddlers and when they're falling and banging and when they're teenagers and have opinions and stuff. And something one of my eldest said to me, but you know, phones is a whole different kind of thing. And one of the things she said, you know, we have very, very strict limits on phones, and we don't have social media yet, even though she's the right age. She doesn't need that in her life right now. And that's a decision we've made and we've agreed on. The 2 girls had asked me something about, you know, phones or whatever. And I said, when you're 18, you can do what you want. And my eldest said to me, she goes, but by the time I'm 18, you'll have rubbed off on me and I'll make choices like you do. And I said, yes, then I'll have won as a parent, because if you make choices, wise choices, and you choose to like come against fear and battle that, I'm like, then I will have done my job as a parent. I nearly cried. It was so beautiful. So I think the lessons you learn, and if you can capture those thoughts and those fears, and you know, there are times where it's rational fears, like, I don't want to bump the baby's head. That makes you just more protective of the way you hold them, doesn't it? And actually, also the other would be, so in labour, it was my husband that spoke really good confidence into me. There was a time where my first, and she threw up, like quite violent. She wasn't very, a couple of months old, and she threw up and then went quite grey and limp. And it freaked me out. And so I phoned my mum, who also freaked out slightly. She tried her best not to, but you could hear it in her voice. So I phoned my sister-in-law, who is a paediatric nurse. And she's like, well, how do you feel after you've been sick? I'm like, oh yeah, I feel a bit like floppy and grey. She's like, okay, here's the 3 things you need to look out for. If any of these happen, this is what to do. And it was just that calm voice of truth into that situation. And it was all fine. So I even think within labour, within parenting, have people around you who speak truth and confidence into you, and it just helps balance those, what's rational fear and what's irrational. It just speaks truth into those moments.
Come on, Nu, I love it. I love it. And it's so true. We do. It's like when people say, oh, toddler years, oh, I'm like, have you met a moody teenager or a preteen? Have you met them before?
Because... very similar to toddlers, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Just more words and opinions.
More words and opinions. And I don't have the same level of grace. It's like I've got so much grace for a 4-year-old who's never navigated this before. You're 11. So it's like, no, I need to change. Anyway, that's a whole other story. That's another podcast for another time.
Series.
No, I'd love to know, how did you journey family and friends who couldn't conceive? And I thought, I find it fascinating that you said that you didn't share much about your quick labour because people are like, it's all right for you. And how did you journey some of that?
Yeah.
Because, we're in a beautiful community, but because we're in such a big community being part of church, there are people for whom it's really hard. We've both been blessed with the fact that conceiving and giving birth has not necessarily had as many complications as it has for others. So how have you journeyed that part of it?
I think I've done better at different times. And I think actually, given that it was often very close friends or family, I think my instinct and my response was sometimes to pull back and not share. But actually, that wasn't necessarily the right thing to do. And I think part of it was having the conversation. So I know with one of mine, with my third, one of my siblings had just had a miscarriage when I was literally just about to, I remember phoning her to say, hey, can we meet up? Because I wanted to tell her that I was pregnant. And actually, she then shared with me that she'd had a miscarriage. So obviously, I then put on hold that I was going to share because that would have been unkind at that time. I think I then developed a relationship with my siblings, especially, that enabled us to then talk about it a bit more and have that on conversation of like, hey, how do you feel about me having lots of babies? And actually it being so very different from the rest of the family, and actually having that conversation with them. And one of them is, I don't ever hold celebrations back from me. Don't ever feel you can't, because I want to know and I want to celebrate. But I would share with them one-on-one, because there would always be, tears from both of us. With siblings, especially, I knew, and actually friends, where there would be an element of, you're not going to find out from like social media or a family WhatsApp group or a family message. I'm going to take the time. So where there was, a story or, a specific challenge or difficulty, I would communicate one-on-one with that person. And then, sometimes some people did need a bit of time. Like, actually, okay, let me go and process this by myself. And that's okay. You let them do that. There's others that actually like, can I hold your baby? Can I be a part of your baby's life? And I know that in other situations where we're living overseas as well, there were families that, some people we met that had very broken backgrounds and very broken stories of parenting, were actually being invited into our family and being allowed to like cuddle my youngest and play with my toddler. Being trusted in that way was actually really healing for them as well. So obviously I was there and around and stuff, it was always done very appropriately, but recognizing that actually there can be healing, but the key to it is communication, and is sensitive communication, I would say. But then also for me personally, not feeling guilty, not letting it, I did sometimes let some different situations like rob my joy, because I didn't feel like I could necessarily like, woohoo, we go again, and like in some scenarios, but that actually was not necessarily true. That was me projecting my assumptions of their feelings onto the situation, whereas, like I said, having that conversation with them brought a bit more clarity to that.
I think you're so right. I think it's really important to preserve two things: the relationship that you have with that person, because comparison and envy and jealousy and fear and it's not fair are all like human emotions that are very real. The other thing to preserve, though, is your own joy. And I think you're right, Neil. I think in an age where there is an increased awareness of how other people feel when you say stuff, I think in other ways it really has quashed like joy and emotion. And I know for me, there was moments with my kids where I had incredibly huge feelings that I didn't let out, and I felt like I had to be quite preserved in a moment that should have been this beautifully deep and huge emotional moment. and I didn't let it because I was worried about what someone else would think. And it's like, hold on a minute. I look back and just think I lost out on a joy and a celebration and like a deep emotional moment because I was so worried what someone else would think or feel. And I think you're right. You have to preserve the relationship and you have to have that open communication. But giving away your joy and giving away your excitement or your moment because of the worry about someone else's feelings really deadens and just robs that little bit. What would you say is your biggest piece of advice for someone about to give birth?
Oh, someone about to give birth. Your body knows what it's doing. You are strong enough. And also, to surround yourself with people when I say surround yourself, obviously not, don't fill the room, but whether it's a medical trusted person, whatever that looks like for you, wherever you are. So one thing, I was very much encouraged to have home births because I had such quick births. I didn't want that. I wanted and actually with my third, because it did go a bit wrong and it could have actually been very, very bad. I was like, no, I don't want the mess at home. I don't want the potential emergency. That was a fear that I don't want a fear of not being in the right place at the right time and my baby not getting help if they needed it. So go with where you feel safe, with people you feel safe with, but also take confidence that your body does know what it's doing. And you are strong enough. And miraculously, you are strong enough.
Amazing. No, thank you so much. I love what you've shared. It's beautiful. It's got depth and purpose. And it's powerful just to hear from someone who's laboured so much. Thank you. You're amazing.
Thank you, friend.